Hello, and welcome to the Bookcast Club, a podcast for people who love books. My name is Chris, and I am coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana. And Sarah, where are you coming to us from?
Hello, I'm coming to you from the Netherlands.
How exciting.
It's another thrilling installment of me being in my bedroom. Although, I will say what is thrilling is my desk is very clean because of this cleaning app that you're using it as well.
Yeah, I downloaded it, and I set all the tasks. I haven't started yet, but that was a pretty great cleaning app. What's it called? Sweepy? What's it called?
Sweepy, yeah. So this app has sort of swept our very small worlds. If you don't follow Lauren, who I guested on the podcast a few months ago, which I will link her in the show notes. She has just got this frankly ridiculous cleaning app, and then she made a video and put it on YouTube about how delighted she is with this. I'm just gonna keep calling it this, a stupid cleaning app. And her enthusiasm was so great, and so motivating that she has. I think Jenny got it, and then I got it, and now you've got it. My friend Anna's got it. It's just spreading radically.
Well, I moved from a 700, 800 square foot apartment into now a really big house, which I share with a roommate. And the thing about being in a small space is that it gets dirty quickly, but it's also really easy to clean because you just can't handle living, with that much filth so quickly. So it's really easy to clean, blah, 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 blah. You kind of know the tasks that need done. Being in a much larger space, it's sometimes hard to remember what all needs done. And there's times when I don't even go into my office for 3-4 days, etc. So it's just a lot easier for tasks to kind of pile up and not get to them, whereas when you're in a small space, that task is glaring at you all the time. So yeah, it's something that kind of just keeps you a little on track.
It suggests small things for you to do every day to accumulate to actually properly deep cleaning your house. For example, today I cleaned the outside of my oven, the doors in our kitchen, the cupboard doors, and the sink I scoured as well. So it's not a complete deep clean of the entire kitchen, but you tackle some components of it. And then the way it works is that you put in every room that you have, and it suggests a bunch of tasks and the suggested intervals. Yeah, I guess we'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's absolutely not sponsored.
No,
we just like it. But if you're curious about it, definitely watch Lauren's video because she goes through the whole thing with great rigor and enthusiasm. It's pretty funny.
It's really, really a good app. But this episode is not going to be about cleaning. We've got a little bit of a hodgepodge episode for us today. The main topic of conversation, which will be in the second half of the podcast, is going to be about our year in reading fantasy books, or in my case, maybe a year of not reading fantasy books. But before that, we want to talk to you a little bit about the Booker Prize and also what we have been reading. Shall we talk about the Booker Prize long list first? Let's just let's go through it. The Booker Prize has announced its long list. I don't think we're going to go through each of the books individually, unless you wanted to, but I just
not really.
Yeah. What were the kind of key takeaways for you from the long list? Anything that was really surprising or that you were really excited about?
Well, the classics, like everyone else, I was surprised that David Copperfield by Charles Dickens was not nominated. I was surprised that Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver wasn't there. And I was actually more surprised that Victory City by Salman Rushdie wasn't there either.
I was not surprised by the lack of Demon Copperhead. And in fact, I originally don't think I even included it on my predictions, but then I just kept seeing more and more and more people being so confident that it was going to be there that I was like, I'll put it on there. But when I read it, as much as I liked it, I really didn't think it read like a Booker Prize nominee.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, I was going to say you don't know if the publishers necessarily nominated the books to be on there, because the way that books get considered by the judges is that the publishers have to submit them, and publishers are only allowed to submit a certain number from their catalogue. So you don't know what they did submit, so it's possible that they didn't even submit. I would assume it would be unlikely that you wouldn't submit a Barbara Kingsolver because she's won stuff before, but I do believe that if you have won it before, that counts as a free entry.
Yeah, it's automatically submitted if you've won before. The judges can also do call-ins, so they can say, hey, you guys didn't submit this book, we actually want to read this book, blah, 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 send it in. So, and I think that actually they have to do a certain number of call-ins.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. But, so there is no, you never know what got submitted, what could have happened. I was very surprised that the Eleanor Catton novel did not make it, Burnham Wood. I was very much expecting that novel to be there.
So she won with the Luminaries about
Yes.
10 years ago, I want to say. She's a New Zealand author.
Yep, exactly 10 years ago.
Thank you. This is this is knowledge off the fly. I have not looked this up.
Very good. I was surprised she was not there, especially given the kind of momentum for Burnham Wood, and then also the fact that Eleanor Catton was named as one of Granta's top 10 young writers. I think, was it under 40, under 35? I can't remember, but one of their top 10s. So I was a little surprised that wasn't there. I was a little disappointed because I wanted to see it there. I was surprised by how many books on the list I had never heard of. All the Irish books I had never heard of. How to Build a Boat. None of those books had I heard of. Of the books that were longlisted, which ones stand out to you as I cannot wait to read this?
Well, the only one that I had been previously interested at all in reading was the Sebastian Barry, which I've since read, actually, since it was longlisted. And then the only other one that really stood out to me immediately was Pearl by Sean Hughes.
I really want to read that one.
Stay tuned because I'm reading it now.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah, and then aside from that, because I am almost certainly, I'll read the short list, if not the whole long list, I actually didn't look up anything, because if I get too engaged with the Booker discussion already, by the time I actually get around to reading it in a month, I'm over it, to be honest with you. So yeah, like you, I had heard of a couple of them, I think, but really, I mean, I don't keep my ear to the ground anywhere near as much as you do. You're far more au fait with that kind of thing than I. But okay, so now that there's been a bit of momentum, a bit more discussion, I'm really excited to read the Bee Sting, because I've seen some really good reviews about that.
I'm not. That's the one that seems like drudgery to me.
Well, I don't know what to do. I haven't read it. But the reviews made it seem really good.
The second I heard it was funny and over 600 pages, I was like, all right, we're out. What's not happening?
Fair enough. Prophet Song I'm quite interested in, and
Yes.
In Ascension.
Yes.
As well. So they're the ones that I haven't picked up. And then I know Study for Obedience has had very mixed... Sorry, we'll put the long list in the show notes. I know we haven't been through them in a lot of detail, but you have to do your own work there. Study for Obedience, I know, has had very mixed reviews. The cover, I love.
It's a really good cover.
It reminds me of the Goldfinch.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just got me.
It's so funny that you're saying all this, because I had the exact same reaction, because I was like, I love the cover, I'm so down for this, and then I heard all these negative reviews, and the negative reviews about the book just made me want to defend the book even more, even though I haven't read it. I was like, I bet it's brilliant, and all of you Philistines just don't understand it. And so I'm really going into the book with that kind of defensive energy, and it better not let me down.
Yeah, it sounds good to me, but yeah, I have not seen amazing reviews, so I'm definitely going to check this one out. I think I'm interested, but yeah, I probably will read the whole shortlist. So yeah, I haven't actually technically finished in God's Time, Old God's Time. What's it called?
Old God's Time, yeah.
So I had that out from the library actually already when it was announced, and then I picked it up. So the concept, Old God's Time, the concept of it, is it's about a retired policeman in Ireland who gets called back to deal with and sort of revisit an old cold case that he was involved with in his time in the force. Was just interested in it because it was like Sebastian Barry, and I was sort of interested to try his next book. I was kind of surprised to be reading this. I was like, this is such a tropey plot for a Booker-nominated novel. But then as it goes on, you realise that because there's not very much detail about the case at all at the beginning, and the beginning opens with such a stereotype scene of two detectives going out to find this gruff old guy who lives alone in a cottage, and they're like, oh, we really need you, sir. And he's like, no, I left all that long ago. That's exactly what's happening. And they're just talking about the case. There's no detail. And then it turns out it's about a child sexual abuse in the Irish Catholic Church. So that's the topic of the book.
Were you following the Booker Prize when they nominated Snap by Belinda Bauer?
Yeah, I've actually read that.
Yeah, because that's the only other time I can really think of where they've really nominated a full-on thriller novel. Which even this one, I understand it's a thriller, it's a genre crime, but it's written by Sebastian Barry, so it's gonna be a little more Bookery.
It's literary fiction as well, I would say.
Yeah. Belinda Bauer was a straight crime writer. She was not crossing into literary circles at all, and that book sucked. That was a fucking abomination.
Agree. I thought it was awful. I also read it. That was the year I believe Val McDermott was on the...
Exactly. And Val McDermott, I literally think that Val McDermott should be ostracized from literary circles for that, because it was such a terrible book, and I understand that, she obviously, as a crime writer herself, probably wanted to put in a crime novel, which I get, you know what I'm trying to say? but there is no way that like the other judges on that committee read that book and were down with it. She had to have been strong arming them.
I like to imagine one of two scenarios unfolded. The first is that it was a recurrence of there's that old story about a judge in the Booker Prize in the early days who was absolutely wanted a book to either win or be shortlisted. Have you heard about this?
No.
And they threatened to throw themselves out the window. Like it got really serious. There's a really funny Guardian article about that came out a few years ago about like things that have happened in the Booker Prize. So that's, I don't know how true that is, but that's a story that goes around that a judge did that one year. So I like to imagine either she did that or a better, more satisfying story is that she wasn't interested in Snap at all, but there was another person on the committee who wanted to sabotage her, and they were going for it. And they were like, everyone is going to think it was Val McDermott, and they're going to lose respect for her, and this is all part of my, carefully crafted plot. And you've fallen for it, Chris. Val wasn't into it. She was voting against every time. She said, I don't think this is good quality.
So, like, everybody was shitting on the book, rightfully. And then what I heard, though, is that, like, Belinda Bauer was just so nice and just so happy to be included and so friendly at all these events and stuff. And then it just made me feel really bad about how mean everybody was being about the book because she was actually just this incredible sweetheart. Yeah, I do feel a little bit bad because she was just evidently this incredible sweetheart that was just like, I'm just so happy to be here. Like, all like really friendly and hugging all these people and stuff. I'm just like, God damn it.
Oh God, that's like when Suzanne Collins won. Suzanne Collins won the Women's Prize with Piranesi. What's her name?
She did not win the Women's Prize.
Piranesi. Who wrote Piranesi? I can't remember her name.
You said Suzanne Collins. Susanna Clark. Yeah.
Susanna Clark. Sure. I had the same reaction where in her speech I was like, she's a very nice person. But I'm not happy about this.
She did not win the Women's Prize.
Piranesi won. Yeah.
No, it didn't.
Yes, it did.
No, it didn't.
I'm sure it won.
I'm sure you're wrong because I was literally when it didn't win, I was like justice for Piranesi.
No, I'm sure.
No, it didn't win. I'm sorry. I hate to inform you.
Piranesi won the 2021 Women's Prize for Fiction.
Here I am, just lying, making up stories, whole fictions. What did it not win that I was upset that it didn't win? Maybe it didn't win the Booker Prize. Maybe that's what I was upset by.
I don't know, mate. What more do you want? I was like, you just completely gaslit me. I was telling you a story about when I watched her victory speech, and you're like, no, that didn't happen. Oh my God, you watched it.
I like to lie sometimes, okay? It's a little fun.
I mean, it could. It was nominated for quite a few things, so I mean, you could have been hot under the collar about one of many things that happened that year.
Because I was very much team that novel should have won absolutely every prize that year. But that was your reaction to her because you thought she was a really nice person? Even though you hated the book?
Yeah, so I felt bad.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't think it should have been nominated for the Women's Prize.
Boo, you're wrong.
Chris, it's not about a woman. It's about a boy running around a museum writing shit down. So that's nothing to do with this year's Booker. We're talking about Old God's Time. That's what we're talking about. So I started reading Old God's Time. And I just found it, even though it's like, maybe that sounds like an interesting plot to you, I found it weirdly boring. And I read, like, over the course of 10 days, I read literally 200 pages, so it was very slow going. And then it was due back at the library, and it had loads of holds, so I just accepted my fate. Yeah. So I've DNF'd it.
I've read one book from the long list so far. I read Western Lane by Chetna Maru. It was perfectly fine. It was one of those books that I was like, this is fine. I feel like it was a coming-of-age debut from, like, recent up-and-coming novelist. What I said about it on like Instagram is that basically I feel like any coming of age literary debut probably is of equal quality to it and could have, I'm trying to say, like, it didn't yeah. I didn't read it and think, oh, this clearly needed to be longlisted for the Booker. It was fine.
Okay. I have the audiobook for that on hold at the library at the moment. And the audiobook, I listened to the sample, it sounds really good. So.
It is good.
It sounds well narrated is what I'm saying.
Don't get me wrong either. Like, I don't want to like shit on the book. Like, it was good. It just wasn't, obviously when something gets longlisted for a prize like that, like, you're going to go into it with a different expectation than like, if the publisher had just been like, hey, here's a new like up and coming talent we're excited about. That's going to have a completely different expectation for me as a reader. Absolutely.
I tend to really frame, it's a bad habit, but I tend to really frame my opinions on a book when it's like, been on shortlisted along, especially if it's won something, then I'm just like, what? Which I mustn't do, but I do it. The other one that I've just started is Pearl by Shaun Hughes, which I'm listening to the audiobook of. I'm really enjoying it so far. So it's sort of a plotless. So far, it's just plotless, and it's about a girl whose mother died when she was quite young, and she's just sort of reflecting on her childhood. Really nice writing so far. I'm really enjoying it. I've only listened to a couple of chapters, but I really enjoyed it.
The reason I'm excited about it is because somebody who I won't name, but who I have very opposite tastes from, said that they enjoyed it, and I was like, or said that they didn't enjoy it, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna love it. Like, it's actually not the person you're thinking of. I already know who you're thinking of. It's somebody else.
Okay.
I won't name names because they are a lovely person, but we just have very different book tastes. But I obsessively watch their content anyway.
You actually got lucky in the episode where you were talking about someone whose reviews you disagree with, because I was going to keep it in and bleep out their name, and then remember Jen and I had that little argument about who was editing. So I think this didn't make the final the cut of the previous episode, but basically Jen and I had a communication problem, and we each started editing the same episode, and then we had one of us was a little combative and called the other, that was me, and was like, what are you doing? And then Jen won, and so she edited the episode. In that episode, Chris went on quite a rant about someone whose reviews he disagrees with, and I in my version of the edit, I'd left that in. I just bleeped out the name, and Jen cut the whole thing, so you really got lucky.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I was really disappointed when I listened to the edited version. I was like, Jen, you're too nice to him. And she was like, oh, well, he was being mean.
I was being mean. Jen was right. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about Pearl, though. Of the ones on there that I'm excited about, I'm really quite excited about, like you said, Prophet Song. And then I'm also excited about In Ascension by Martin McInnes. And All the Little Bird Hearts. I'm really excited about All the Little Bird Hearts. I think that sounds really good. I'm a little bit sick and tired already of the conversation surrounding In Ascension by Martin McInnes. Okay, and the reason this actually segues well into a topic that we'll be discussing later, but as somebody who reads a lot of science fiction and fantasy, it is very frustrating when a book like this, which is sci-fi or fantasy, gets into kind of like a literary circle, exposed to the literary circle, and then people who read nothing but literary fiction, which is totally fine, like not a problem with that, they talk about the book in a way that just is so removed from the conversation it's probably having with books that are like similar to it. And it drives me crazy because like I heard somebody, and I won't say names, me continuing to be mean, somebody was talking about the book and they were like, it sounds so crazy, so interesting, so unique. Like, it has, like, an aspect of it, like, another planet. Like, whoa. I'm like, have you heard of the science fiction genre? Like, there's tens and tens and tens and thousands of books that have been... Like they were acting like Martin McInnes had invented the idea. Like, it was just fucking dumb. You know what I mean? I just get tired of it. I'm just like, just fucking read a book before you open your mouth.
Well, if you're one of those people that Chris has just dragged... welcome, first of all, and you're in luck because we're going to talk about fantasy novels today, so that's perfect. We're going to fix you. Chris is going to fix you.
Yeah, but no, it does drive me a little bit nuts though sometimes, and like I'm sure this happens with other genres too, but like I feel like it happens a lot with science fiction and fantasy because literary circles tend to think of those as like children's books, and then they don't really take it seriously as a genre until somebody like Martin McInnes or other type of literary credibility goes out and writes a fantasy book, and then they all pretend like that person has done something revelatory, i.e. Marlon James.
Whoa, you didn't know? Whoa, Marlon James, no way. No, don't drag Marlon James on this podcast. That man deserves your respect.
I didn't say...
He has nothing. We're actually pointing our fingers at each other at the moment. He has nothing but the greatest respect for fantasy and all writing.
Exactly. No, he does. That's what I mean about Marlon James. He does. But everybody who read that book, and we're talking about that book, as if like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't know how many people I heard that were talking about it, and I was like...
You're talking about
Red Leopard, Black Wolf, or whatever. Yeah. But like that type of thing like happens a lot with that, and it drives me nuts. There's definitely some books on here I'm really excited about. Only a couple that I would say I'm really not interested in. I'm really not interested in The House of Doors. I'm sorry, that sounds awful. Godspeed to those who find that interesting, but yeah.
Cool. Can I talk about two other books quickly that I'm currently reading?
Yeah, let's talk about our currently reads.
Is that all right,
Yeah,
Chris?
it is.
Chris is the boss today. I've got to check with him before I move on to the next segment, or he'll get annoyed. I'm reading a lot at the moment, kind of. I'm back. I'm feeling motivated. Nice. I'm excited. It's been great. First one is a memoir. I'm reading Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming. Love him. He's an actor. If you don't know his name, or you think you don't know his name, look him up, because he's one of those actors where once you see him, you're like, oh, actually, I have seen him in many things. This is his memoir about growing up in Scotland with his father, who was very abusive. And he talks about his childhood, the dynamics of it, how he then, and what he actually does is throughout the whole memoir, he splits it into two sections called Now and Then, and he goes back and forth between them. So you have a chapter of Now, which is him being like on Broadway and doing fun stuff, living his fabulous life. And then, so it stops it from being like this really sad memoir about a sad child, basically, because the chapters are quite snappy. And there's a lot of humor, and he's got his writing is very good, actually. So it keeps it, even though it is a depressing memoir, keeps it light. I bought it in not my most recent trip to the UK, but the one before that. I went to Gaze the Word and got it from that bookshop. Where was I going with that? And I got it, and I'm really, really enjoying it, and he's great.
What's the other book you've been reading?
Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot I said two. The other one is a fantasy book. It's called The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid.
I've wanted to read this. I own it.
You own it. I'm reading it because I don't have a to-read list anymore. I felt like reading a fantasy. I wanted to read a fantasy book that I hadn't heard of I just wanted to read something blind. I don't know. And so I went on the Storygraph app, and they do like recommendations there, and I just looked for recommendations based on my own reading tastes and just filtered by fantasy and picked the first one. And it was like $3 on Kobo.
Very nice. Is that an audiobook?
It is a ebook.
Ebook, okay. I didn't know what Kobo was, so.
Oh, it's Kobo's like Kindle, but it's
okay.
An independent I guess an independent company. You don't know Kobo?
No. Well, I don't do hardly any ebooks. So like everything that's happening with ebooks, the technology, the programs, whatever, like I just I don't pay attention to it because I just don't use them. So
I switched to Kobo in an effort to get away from Amazon. I like them very much. I read a lot of ebooks. I get a lot of ebooks out from my library. Anyway, what is the Wolf and the Woodsman about, I hear you ask? It is based on, it's very similar, it's got very similar vibes to like a Naomi Novik, and it is based on, I believe, Hungarian folklore, and it is about a village in some sort of like remote woodsy area who once a year have to give these people called the Woodsmen come to their village, and they take one of the girls away, and the village sort of like gives up this girl, and the villagers have magic, and they're basically trying to stop the Woodsman from taking someone who has magic. And it's kind of a very classic fantasy story in that, of course, the main character instantly gets chosen in the first chapter to be taken by the Woodsman. I think I've read the first 100 pages. And so what's happened in the first couple of chapters is that she's been taken by the Woodsman. It sounds very, very similar to, in the Grisha series by Leigh Bardugo, the way that the people who are like in that country that's similar to Finland think of the Grisha, like they don't have any magic themselves and they hate it and fear it and want to kind of like wipe them out. I can't remember what they're called.
I've never read anything Grisha or Leigh Bardugo, so I'm just kind of going off the vibes here.
But yeah, you know what I mean. There's like those people who are like from the north covered in fur and they want to hurt everyone. So that's like what the Woodsmen are. And so then, of course, she's like getting taken through the woods by this like group of men, fearing what's going to happen to her when she gets to the palace. And then something happens. It ends up being her and one other guard, and it's just like the two of them. So it's like a sort of grumpy captor and the girl is what's happening so far. So it's now giving me it's making me think of the it's Kushiel's Dart. It's what I'm now thinking of. I don't think it's going to go in that direction, but it's got that kind of like I was reading it like, how often have I read this kind of thing with it where like we're in the woods, there's a grumpy guy who has to he's like the guardsman, and then like the girl who's the the talent basically.
Yeah.
It's quite good so far. It's not blowing me away by any stretch of the imagination. I really hope the plot goes somewhere. It's going to have to go somewhere in the next 50 to 100 pages that I don't expect, because otherwise I probably won't finish it. Because so far it's feeling... I mean, I've just mentioned, like 4 other fantasy novels. It's just reminding me of things that I've read.
My reading has been not so great, actually, over the past few weeks. And it's kind of a disappointment because I was really excited about this first week of August reading because both of my favorite novelists were releasing new books. So Ann Patchett was releasing Tom Lake, which is very buzzy right now. One, because it's a new Ann Patchett book, so it's obviously going to be buzzy. She's one of the most beloved literary writers that America has ever produced. I think that the New York Times called her Aunt Patchett because of just how much everybody loves her, and she's just kind of seen as this like wonderful figure in the American literary scene. Meryl Streep is narrating the audiobook of Tom Lake. It's gonna be a big deal. I was super excited for it. I bought the book. I got halfway through the book. I think it's really, really bad, and I've not been able to get the motivation to finish it. And I'm actually just so sad about that I don't even want to talk about it because it's so depressing to read a book by somebody like Ann Patchett, who I think is really talented and smart, and read a book that I don't think is very talented and smart. Just kind of wonder how that happened. So yeah, I've not been enjoying that one. And then the other book that came out that I was really, really excited for was Cassiel's Servant, which is the kind of companion novel to Kushiel's Dart. That's going to be, it follows the perspective of the bodyguard, Jocelyn Veroux. I actually am enjoying this book, but it wasn't compelling me enough to kind of really push me through. And something I was worried about this book, which I do think is true, is that when you read Kushiel's Dart, you will find that there are a lot of scenes where the main character, Phaedra, is kind of has snuck away from her guard to go do what she needs to do for the plot. And Jocelyn is just kind of waiting for her, right? And I kind of thought, I was excited to read this book because I was like, well, we'll see what was going on with Jocelyn during those moments. What's going on with Jocelyn is that he's standing around and waiting. It's actually not that exciting at all. And the thing is, like, I already know the plot of Kushiel's Dart really, really well. I studied that book's politics so hard that, like, I can recite everything that happens and, like, who's connected how, what assassination attempts. And it's, like, all of the political intrigue in this book, I'm like, yeah, I already know because I read Kushiel's Dart. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, so I feel like this book would be really good for somebody who hadn't read Kushiel's Dart and was maybe a little bit intimidated by the amount of sexiness in Kushiel's Dart, because Jocelyn's character is a little bit sexless in the beginning. And so you would probably find maybe that to be a better entry level. But as somebody who knows the politics and the story pretty well, I gotta say it's a little boring, which I kind of pains me to say. I still really like the writing, and, like, you know, it's nice to be in this world again. Like, but those are the things I find compelling about it. It's just the familiarity with something that I love more than it being a good book on its own. So I was feeling really depressed about my reading, and then I picked up The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty, which I believe to be one of the greatest novels ever written. I'm a little over halfway through it. It's fucking fantastic. If you have not read it, you absolutely must. And the reason I actually resisted reading it for so long is because the blurb of the book is so vague and just doesn't tell you anything. And I didn't really feel compelled to read it based off of that blurb. And I'm finding now, as somebody who is reading it and loving it, that I understand the challenge that the blurb writers were having. It is such a strange book with such a strange plot and such strange little meanderings that there is really no good way to describe what the fuck this book is doing. It's following the inhabitants of an apartment complex that is colloquially known as the Rabbit Hutch in Vaca Vale, Indiana, which is a very thinly veiled fictionalization of South Bend, Indiana. And you follow so many different people with so many different connections to the building. And the way those connections, like, play out are very, very interesting and fun to follow. So let me give you, like, a quick little example of, like, a connection you can trace throughout the book. One of the people you're following, and probably the main person you're following, is this 18-year-old girl named Blondine. She's brilliant. She's just out of the foster system. But she has this kind of, like, intelligence and way of presenting herself to other people that's very off-putting and really alienating from other people. She's very interested in female mystics from the Middle Ages, and she's obsessed with trying to find a way to escape her own body. She goes to the laundromat one day where she meets one of her neighbors, who I think is named Joan. And so then the next chapter, you follow Joan, who works for a company where they do those, like, online obituaries, and she is somebody who has to screen all of the comments on the obituaries to make sure that they are not violating their terms of services and talking negatively about the dead. And so then you learn about her and her work. And then you read of this viral obituary that has gone viral on the website, and then you follow the son of the person that the obituary is written about. So there's all these, like, crazy connections, all, like, cool, linking and looping back on each other. The novel is impossible to describe. Like, it is so strange and so weird and so bewildering, and it never really wants to let you get settled. The main focus is on Blondine and what's happening to her and what has led her to here. but intermixed with that is just all this strangeness. I love it. I feel like I've talked way too long about it, but it's really good.
It's interesting because we were talking about this during the week because it won the National Book Award, but I feel like it's just had relatively very little press.
I know.
I'd actually got it out from the library earlier this year and I'd started to read it and it had story of my life. It had to go back, but it's not big here. I'm surprised actually that they haven't marketed it more from the angle of like David Mitchell because it sounds akin to a David Mitchell novel to me. What's your opinion on this?
I think maybe I'm wrong. I think one of the reasons, I think that for maybe me and you, a lot of what gets filtered to us as being like the important literary books comes from the UK because we pay attention a lot. I certainly pay a lot more attention to things like UK book prizes. I pay a lot more attention to the things that like magazines like The Guardian, Granta, all those different places are kind of promoting than I do to the American book scene. So I do think that this book is quite American. It's also quite Hoosier. So it's very much focused on Indiana. And as somebody who comes from Indiana and, grew up very close to South Bend, Indiana, there was something about this book that I find almost like looking at yourself through a funhouse mirror, because I'm so familiar with what's being presented, but all of it is just fictionalized in a way that's very strange and bizarre. So that's been really fun. And it's not often that you see Indiana kind of picked apart seriously in a piece of literature. So yeah, I think maybe it just hasn't gotten to the kind of European circles, because I think that in America it has done huge. I mean, it won our National Book Award, so.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just want to take a quick break to let you know about the ways that you can support the podcast. A really effective and free way of showing your support is by rating and reviewing us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. You can share our posts on social media. We are at Bookcast Club on both Instagram and TikTok. We also write a monthly newsletter which you can sign up to on our website, which is linked in the show notes. If you would like to support the podcast financially, we also have a Patreon account. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. We offer early access to the podcast, monthly bonus episodes, personalized book recommendations, and books in the post. And we personally think we have some really good episodes on our Patreon, so check us out. We also have a offer at the moment where you can try our Patreon for free for 7 days, which does give you instant access to all of our bonus episodes. So the link for all of that kind of stuff is in the show notes, as are all the books and everything else that we discussed today. But however you choose to support us, we want you to know we really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. Okay. How's your past year in fantasy been?
Shit.
Speaking of. Shit.
It's really funny. When I first started doing like BookTube, I read almost nothing but literary fiction, and then I started reading a lot of fantasy. And I kind of became known as like a fantasy reviewer. Like that was the thing that when people would mention my channel, they would always like, he reads a lot of fantasy books that you've probably never heard of, which was true because I would scour used bookstores and read things with terrible covers that probably other people would pass up. But then over the past year, I really have just not read much fantasy. So I guess what I'm about to talk about is going to be how I plan on rectifying that. I mean, I have picked up some fantasy, don't get me wrong, but it just hasn't been with the same kind of voraciousness as I used to. How about you? How's your fantasy been? I
will just say I forgot to, when I segued, I should have said this is actually the third fantasy episode that Chris and I have done together. We've basically been doing them every year where we discuss our year in fantasy or whatever. Mine has, I thought it was quite dreadful also, but then I actually looked at it and I've read like, I look at this list. How long is this list? I would say 10 fantasy novels in the last year, so I'm doing all right. A lot of them have been rereads or ones that we have discussed on the pod, so I'm only going to very briefly go over them. I reread the whole Raven Cycle, which is 4 books, and then I read the first 2 of the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater, which is like a YA coming over into young whatever the next thing up, coming over into young adult.
Does it say like what, new adult? Is that what they say now?
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of like mature YA. It's like slightly dirty YA.
So the teenagers are boning in this one.
No, they get into drugs.
Oh,
so
okay.
whatever you call that.
Okay.
I like it. Like there's a bit more like grit than in a normal YA. So I reread those 4, and then I read the trilogy that follows that, which is called the Dreamers Trilogy. I read the first 2 of that. That was my sort of first 6. Then I reread a Robin Hobb, Ship of Magic, which I read with a friend of mine because she has read all of the Farseer books and not the Live Ship Traders.
Shame.
And I was like, excuse me. Yeah,
Shame.
a shame. And she listens to the podcast, so she'll know that we're talking about her. Loved it. And then I read the first two in the World of Riverside trilogy, which is something you recommended to me. Sometimes I do listen to you. So this is by Ellen Kushner, and these are kind of what are they called? Regency fantasies or something?
I've heard them
What's the
described
genre?
as like fantasy of manners, I think has been the term that I've
That's
heard.
what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah, I don't really exactly understand what that means, but it's sort of like fantasy set around, yeah, whatever.
I think it's like,
People waving swords around
yeah, I guess it
and
also could
being
be like kind of
dukes.
like the fantasy that almost maybe reminds you a little bit of like a Jane Austen novel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to use the word Bridgerton, but then I didn't want to use that word, but
Yeah.
I've used it now. But that would not be a very good. Like, don't if you like Bridgerton, don't. You know, yeah, yeah. We've talked about those at length, so I'm not going to go into them now. But liked them both. They're kind of disconnected. They're like the same world, but they don't follow the same characters
Mhm.
necessarily. And I've got the third one, but I haven't finished it yet.
What is the third one? Is that called The Privilege of the Sword?
No, that's the first one.
That's the first one. Okay. That was not what I thought the first one was called.
Well,
Okay.
you've been wrong today.
Yeah, I
You're
have
wrong
been.
again.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first one is definitely called The Privilege of the Sword. New trend. And finally, I come to the one that I actually wanted to recommend today, which I read quite recently, which is The Betrayals by Bridget Collins.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I know. So Bridget Collins is a kind of, I want to say, not that talked about, sort of like fantasy stroke historical fiction writer. She writes these novels that are kind of fantasy light. They tend to be very, very British, very like historical fiction, but they have elements of fantasy in them. And I first read one of her books when we did I think our first episode about fantasy, and we were trying to recommend books for people that don't read a lot of fantasy. And I was like researching for the episode, and read The Binding by her, which I really really enjoyed, and I thought was an excellent example of like fantasy for people that they don't want to get into like a whole new world and aren't used to reading about like different magic systems or whatever. This is just a sort of a story set in the real world, but it has magic in it basically. So this is her latest book, and I actually started it about a year ago, and then I didn't finish it because I wasn't enjoying it at the time. And then I picked it up again a couple of months ago and really enjoyed it the second time. So it's quite slow, and it just wasn't quite what I was in the mood for the first time I tried to read it. So it's set in France in like, let's call it, I don't know, the 18th century, something like that, the 19th century. And it is about a man who is a powerful member of the government, and he does something to upset the party, and he's forcibly removed, basically. And they go and they fire him, and they send him, and he's sort of in public disgrace, and they send him back to his school that he used to go to, which is a very exclusive school, and he's going back to like kind of work as a member of the teaching staff there. So the purpose of this school is to learn how to do this thing called like I don't know, it's French, the Grand Jeu, whatever. I don't know. It means the great game. It's this huge game that everyone like learns how to play. He was basically a master of this, and he's going back to sort of be a member of the teaching staff. And this is where the book becomes like very fantastical, because this game is magic, and it is one of those novels where there's not a lot of explanation about the magic system or whatever. There's just this sort of like mysterious game that they're all like working towards. If you are a fantasy reader, you would have probably come across this kind of thing before. But the reason why I liked it so much, the Bridget Collins does place very very well. So she can set a very strong scene, and she can set relationship and dynamics between characters very well. And she's quite good at the understated dynamic. So being able to communicate to you like the dynamics and tensions between characters without putting a lot on the page is quite subtle. And the reason why it's so significant that this sort of politician has gone back is because he has quite a sordid and dark past with this school, and he was responsible and involved with a lot of things that went on when he was at school, which he has not dealt with at all, and he's sort of ignored and removed all evidence of, and he's sort of being forced to think about this again. And also a lot of the people who were still at the school were also involved with this, so he has this kind of like quite dark past, and that's kind of the plot of the novel, is him sort of trying to get his position back with the government, and him trying to sort of think about the things that he did a long time ago, feeling guilty about them, and not really understanding exactly what went on, because there's a lot of weird politics in the school as well. So there's a lot of complicated dynamics going on, and he never really understood because he was only a teenager. And the setting is just very, very rich. If you like castles, rainy, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Dark academia, like that's the kind of vibe that it is. It is the closest book I think I've read to The Night Circus by
I
Erin
was
Morgenstern.
literally going to say, Bridget Collins, every time her books get described, give me massive Erin Morgenstern vibes. And I was going to
Yeah.
see what you thought of that. Okay, that's funny.
Erin Morgenstern, I did really like The Night Circus. I will say I think The Night Circus is more... Erin Morgenstern is more style than substance, in my opinion.
Okay.
Bridget Collins, I think, has a bit more substance.
Okay.
Is that really rude to say? I'm sorry, Erin Morgenstern.
Ah.
It's a little bit less of Pinterest board. Although I did love The Night Circus. I love The Night Circus, but it is like a big Pinterest board,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, the way that Bridget Collins writes is a little bit a little bit less of like, oh, let's write really lush descriptions of these like amazing magical food and all that kind of stuff, and let's be a bit more concentrated on characters. So I think like if you would have a greater chance of liking this, I think than The Night Circus, that is for sure.
Nice. My reading in fantasy has been shit. I reread a lot of Robin Hobb, which was great. So I don't want to insinuate that was shit. I just haven't read a lot of new stuff. So I've reread a lot of Robin Hobb. I'm literally on the last book. I just haven't gotten around to reading it. One of the reasons I haven't gotten around to finishing it is because as much as I really love Robin Hobb, I actually don't think that the final series, the final trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings is the strongest. And it's a little sad to end on a note that's not as maybe triumphant as something like Fool's Fate or Ship of Destiny, you know? So yeah, I've just not really steeled myself for that yet. So I've been rereading that. There were a lot of fantasy like short stories I was reading, but I wanted to talk about like some stuff that's kind of like on my radar to read to kind of rectify where my year's been going. One is that I really want to read Robin Hobb's novels that she wrote as Megan Lindholm. So I actually did read one of those books, which was called The Reindeer People. It was one of the very first books she published. And it's a very different fantasy from pretty much anything else I've ever read. It feels kind of in the spirit of like the Clan of the Cave Bear, because it's following people who are kind of like ancient humans, following a mother and son who are kind of wanderers because the son is very different. It's never obviously explicitly called autism. One, because Robin Hobb was writing this in the 80s, so I don't think maybe they knew as much about autism. Also, the characters are in a fantastical version of the world taking place 10,000 years ago, right? So, like, they wouldn't have called it autism, but I think to the modern reader, his behaviors definitely read like they're on the spectrum, right? Because of this, they're very much ostracized. They kind of have to depend on the generosity of the villages and stuff like that. And one of the villages they visit, the son actually gets taken under the wing of this shaman who is actually quite a wicked character and who believes that kind of like the son's behaviors and stuff are actually a sign that he can do this divine magic, and so takes him on as an apprentice. But actually the guy is clearly a misogynistic pig and wants to get at the mother of this son. So they flee that group one day and they end up in another village, always being hunted by this shaman who is after her son. So you follow that's the main plot of the first book. I actually really like that book. One of the reasons I really liked it is because the mother in that book doesn't particularly like being a mother. She's quite critical of her son. She's not the kind of really good mom that you would expect, and yet her kind of bad behavior towards her son is actually really sympathetic. Like, you really feel bad for her and just how much of a challenge her son presents to her, which I don't think I've ever really read any other fantasy book. A bad mother is taken so seriously and is so sympathetic. So I really liked that, and I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel to that book, which is this a duology. So once I finish that entire series will be finished. The other book I really, really want to read this year, and in fact, it's probably like my biggest priority going into the fall. What do you think it's going to be? I think you already know what it's going to be.
Oh my god.
And you're not going to be happy with me. It's going to be Susanna Clarke.
Oh.
I really want to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
God, I panicked then. I was like, God, I hope you haven't mentioned this book many times and I haven't been listening. Oh, whatever.
Yeah, I'm really... Now, did you ever even try Jonathan Strange or Mr. Norrell?
I believe it's Mr. Norrell, actually.
I am pretty sure I heard her talking about it and she said Norrell, and that's why I started saying Norrell.
Oh, all right. Well, then it's 1-1. I think I tried it a long time ago, potentially.
Okay.
That could be a lie. I don't know. Pass.
Okay.
Unsure, Your Honor. I don't know.
I've heard absolutely nothing but good things about it. And then one of my favorite podcasts ever is this podcast, besides ours. Obviously, ours is the most important one.
Yeah.
But
Very
if
good.
ever you have listened to all of our backlist, twice, make sure you listen to it all twice. And you're looking for maybe another bookish podcast to go listen to, I would recommend Podside Picnic. And they are actually going to be reading this book as like kind of a read along. So I definitely want to participate in that and read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And read that because I've heard really good things about that, and I guess it actually kind of links very tenuously to Piranesi, which is a book that I think is fucking brilliant.
Some people do say that. I don't know this podcast. I'm looking them up.
Podside Picnic, yeah, they're really funny. They have so many episodes, and they do a lot of different stuff besides books. Like they do like movies. It's like all science fiction and fantasy media that you could possibly like think of. And their episodes are quite long, so if you're the type of person who really likes having like a really long chatty podcast on while you're like cleaning the house or something, they're a really good one for that. So yeah, okay, where was I? Susanna Clarke. Want to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and then the other book that I'm really thinking this is going to get me like really hyped for fantasy is I really want to read a book called The King's Peace by Jo Walton. Are you aware of this book?
I think so. I'm gonna have to look up the cover, but I don't think so.
So it's an Arthurian legend retelling. It was actually Jo Walton's debut novel. So Jo Walton's very well known in the fantasy community for two things. One is that she wrote a novel called Among Others, which won the Nebula Prize. It also got like quite a bit of buzz in the literary community, not just like in science fiction and fantasy. So it was a really big deal. The other thing that Jo Walton's kind of known for is the fact that like none of the books she writes is very similar to other books she's written. Like every book feels like it's its own distinct like subgenre and thing. But her very first novels was actually a fantasy trilogy that was an Arthurian legend thing. Over the years, Jo Walton has been hilariously critical of the novel The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. Her tirades against that book are hilarious. She's a very funny woman, and she writes a lot of blogs and essays for Tor.com, and she has eviscerated The Myths of Avalon. And this Arthurian legend retelling that she is telling, I think in a lot of ways it's like her response to The Myths of Avalon. And I'm going to read something that I think is really, really funny. The first time I read it and heard about it and realized that it was an Arthurian legend retelling, I was like, oh, clearly, this was her axe to grind against the Mists of Avalon. And then the very first like blurb on it from like another author is Deborah Doyle, and she says a rich immediacy that calls to mind the best of Thomas Mallory and Rudyard Kipling. The King's Peace is the novel that the Mists of Avalon should have been.
Oh God.
So I just find it very funny that this novel exists as maybe a gigantic fuck you to Marion Zimmer Bradley, who, if you don't know anything about Marion Zimmer Bradley, deserves all the fuck yous as she is roasting in the fiery pits of hell. Yeah, so anyway, that book is the other book that I'm really kind of convinced is going to really get me my fantasy juices going. For any listeners out there who don't mind looking into disturbing content, going into the history of Marion Zimmer Bradley and her husband, which if you do like any internet research, you can go down the rabbit hole into, which I won't go into detail here because it's horrifying. It is unbelievable when you read about what happened, how many people in the science fiction and fantasy community were completely aware of what was happening and just supported it and did nothing. Like, it is like the names of people who were involved, it's like a total mindfuck. I have two others that I'm really wanting to read, and both of these are actually ones I've started. They're short story collections, which I feel like when we talk about fantasy books, a lot of times we don't talk much about short story collections, but short fiction is where fantasy and science fiction got going, right? It was in the pulps. People talk about J.R.R. Tolkien as being the father of fantasy. I really don't think it was. I mean, in a sense it was, right? But I think actually a lot of times people forget how important the pulps were for really finding science fiction and fantasy. So I love short stories for that reason. And there are two that I've started and really loved. The one is brand new, and it's White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link. So have you ever read any Kelly Link before?
No. I don't even know who Kelly Link is, mate.
Oh, really? She is a short story writer who really has helped to solidify what I will call magical realism, but I know isn't really magical realism, or fabulism, as kind of like a serious modern literary thing. I would say fabulism, not magical realism. Magical realism, I would say, is more for things that are in a Latin American tradition. Non-Latin American tradition, though, I think is what we call fabulism. So she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, one of the few kind of like major fantasy authors out there who has established some like really serious literary credibility. And this is her latest collection. And I've actually read the first couple of stories in here and they were really, really good. I've had hit or miss reactions to her work in the past, but when she writes a story that I connect to, it is like lightning in a bottle. It's really, really good. She has a very kind of incredibly bizarre way of constructing a story, and you are never sure, I think, when you start a Kelly Link story, what direction you're about to go to. It's very dark and creepy and weird and strange and like being inside of a funhouse. The other one, which is actually funny because this was published by Kelly Link. Kelly Link actually owns the publishing company Small Beer Press, and she wrote the introduction to this short story collection, which is called The People in the Castle. And it's a short story collection from Joan Aiken, who wrote most of her stuff like in the mid 20th century. And she was an English short story writer. She wrote a lot of stuff for kids. And these feel like very old English fantasy stories. She has this beautiful turn of phrase in her writing that is just kind of mesmerizing. And I'm going to read like a little sentence in here that has stuck with me from the day I read this story. And it's the very first story in this collection. One moment while I find it.
Please hold the line caller. Beautiful cover on that, by the way.
Yeah, it's fantastic, right? This is a sentence from the opening of A Leg Full of Rubies. In fact, actually, I'm just going to read the whole paragraph because it's wonderful. Night now, and a young man, Theseus O'Brien, coming down the main street of Killinch with an owl seated upon his shoulder, perhaps the strangest sight that small town ever witnessed. The high moors brooded around the town. All up the wide street came the sighing of the river, and the August night was as gentle and full as a bucket of new milk. I mean, come on, right there.
Beautiful.
It's wonderful, right? So she just has this wonderful kind of old Englishy turn of phrase for landscapes and descriptions and stuff that is just really, really good. So I'm really excited about this. And that's kind of where my fantasy reading is going. I've fallen out of it. I'm looking to fall back into it.
Yeah, I'm also. I haven't been. Even though I did list a lot of books in the warm up, I haven't been following newer stuff at all. Like I've just sort of been going back to stuff that I already know. I always find it harder. I don't know why. I find it harder to find out about fantasy than litfic, or I find it harder to be convinced that it might be something that I would enjoy than I do for litfic.
I find that like the great conundrum of fantasy for me anymore, and this is something that Mercedes over at Mercy's Bookish Musings talked about in a recent video, and I completely agree with her, is that a lot of the fantasy books that are coming out now and being published like in the past 5-6 years sound and read very similar to like YA in tone and voice. And so that makes me want to gravitate towards like older fantasy books where I find that the tone, the voice, the prose, etc. is much more matched to what I want as a reader. But a lot of times those older books, pretty white, pretty male, and don't have the kind of interesting stuff going on that maybe some of these books coming out now that just aren't written in a style that particularly excites me.
Yeah, I've DNF'd loads of stuff. Like I try a lot of stuff that's coming out. And then I try it and I'm like, no, I hate the dialogue. I hate the way this is written. The Atlas 6, for example.
Oh. Don't get me started.
I also DNF'd that, is it called Fourth Wing? The
Rebecca Yarros, yeah. That's like...
Yeah, same reason. I was like, I just don't like the writing.
You know what? I think people already think of me as a snob, so I'm not even going to apologize when I'm about to say something snobbish. Nothing puts me off of a book more. Nothing is more of a book boner crusher than if it gets viral on TikTok. The second it's put on the bookstore, the TikTok sensation, I'm like, all right. No thanks.
That doesn't make you a snobby, that makes you a boomer.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe this is it. This is what being old feels like. looking at what the youngins are reading and being like, oh.
I agree. I'm just looking at some of my recent DNFs. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, The Atlas Six, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon.
Yeah.
She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Yeah. She Who Became the Sun, I think that was more from memory. I wasn't in the mood for it then. There was a problem with the book. The Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand. The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Yeah. All of these I'm just like, meh, when I start reading them.
Do you find that a lot of them have a very young tone to them?
Yes, and for me, it's always the dialogue. I get really annoyed by dialogue very quickly. Like bad dialogue that's really laboured, and you don't even need people to talk to each other really, like in good writing. And when there's these like laboured conversations where people are like saying all this stuff, I'm like, stop, don't make me read this, I hate it.
I DNF'd S.A. Chakraborty's, no, I didn't DNF it, I finished it, but I really didn't like it. S.A. Chakraborty's novel, the first book. Okay, The City of Brass. I read The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. That book was YA. Like, I'm just going to say that now, and I'm so done arguing with people on the internet and apologizing about it. It was a YA novel. It was published by an adult press, right? But it was totally YA. And what made me kind of upset when I would have these conversations where I'd be like, this is totally a YA novel, is that people would argue back and they'd be like, but the character's 22 years old, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, but she reacts to the world as if a 15-year-old. Like, I'm pretty sure she's never had sex. Like, all of this different stuff, like, all of it is coming of age, blah, 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 blah. Like, you've just told me that she's 22. That doesn't... You didn't write her as a 22-year-old. You don't feel like it. Yeah. But what drove me mad about that book, is I remember on some forum, I was arguing with people about it, and they were like, you're only saying that because... she's a woman of color who wrote the book, and they get called YA even when they're not. And I'm like, S.A. Chakraborty is white. Her last name is Chakraborty because her husband is a man of color. She is white. But it was very funny how many people would just assume that she wasn't on these places. I don't know how many times I've seen her come up as like top 10 fantasy novelists to read by women of color. I'm like, she's not. She's white. She's even had to put on her website, like on her official website, I am a white woman. Stop calling me. Like, she's had to officially come out and be like, I'm white.
Come out.
Huh?
Oh my god.
It's funny.
Just come out, the phrasing is funny. It is funny. Oh, kill me.
But you know, that's kind of where I struggle sometimes with fantasy anymore that comes out. It's like, I don't know. I can't remember the last time Tor Books released a book that I was like genuinely excited about.
Yep, I agree. But we'll get there. We'll keep going. We'll find stuff. When it's good, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a genre that I'm both love, am so critical of, and defensive of. I have this like insane relationship with the genre that I don't have with any other genre of fiction.
Yeah, you're funny. You're very hot, cold, and warm.
But yeah, that was what we have to say about fantasy, the Booker, and our recent reads. This has been one of the most rambliest episodes I've ever done.
I know, I'm actually dreading the edit. I was going to say to you at the outset, can you please be concise? Because I'm going to do the edit really quickly tomorrow. You're killing me. But it's been a really nice conversation.
It has been a really nice conversation, yeah. But yeah, we will be back soon with more bookish content. If you want to see more of us and you're not subscribed to the Patreon, what are you doing? You should go over and be on our Patreon. You can have 7-day free membership now, which means you can take 7 days, listen to all of our backlist, and kick out of there before you gotta pay.
Hey, don't tell people that. That's a hack. People, by the way, if you do that, we do see that.
Yeah,
we
but
don't care.
We don't care. We're happy. We're happy to get the episodes out there.
Makes us laugh.
Yeah, it makes us laugh.
Yeah.
So yeah, 7-day free trial up on Patreon. If you want to reach out to us, we are at Bookcast Club on all the social medias. We are the Bookcast Club at outlook.com, I believe is our email.
Yeah.
If you want to send us an email. But anyway, you want to reach out to us, we are always happy to receive feedback, and we are really excited to talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.